Hello everyone. Alchemy, the elixir of immortality, is the journey to seek a perfect material essence. You've probably heard many stories or watched movies about alchemy. But have you truly understood it? Let's explore together. Before drifting into your dreams, maybe take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It will be fascinating to see people joining us from all around the world. Now dim the lights, enjoy the quiet atmosphere. Listen to the story along with the soft crackle of the fire, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. Have you ever wondered if, on a quiet evening, you stepped into an old room with the dim golden flicker of a candle, and suddenly, on the table, among the worn-edged rolls of brown parchment, there appeared a glass vial holding a liquid that shimmered like gold. I once found myself in that very moment. As I stepped closer, the light reflected from that liquid reminded me of an age-old story. A story about people who spent their entire lives seeking gold in a way no one else could. And so the first question arose. What exactly is alchemy? Is it the kind of magic that witches in old tales use to turn stone into gold? Or just a game of imagination played by people from ancient times? Alchemy, or the art of transmutation, is not merely a kind of sorcery. It is a tradition that is both philosophical and proto-scientific, originating in antiquity and practiced in many regions: Europe, Egypt, the Arab world, India, China. Its goal, which may sound simple, has driven thousands to devote their entire lives to it, to purify, mature, and perfect certain substances. In popular imagination, this means turning base metals into gold or creating the elixir of immortality. But in reality, alchemy is far more complex and far-reaching than that. Why purify a substance? Why not simply make gold? Because in the minds of the ancients, matter and spirit were deeply connected. Purifying matter also meant purifying the soul. Transforming a metal from a low state to a high one was like elevating a person from the ordinary to the perfect. You see, from the very beginning, alchemy was both a science and a philosophy. If you close your eyes, imagine a marketplace in the city of Alexandria in ancient Egypt around the 2nd century. The sounds of merchants bargaining, the clinking of clay jars, the metallic clang of tools. And in a dark corner, behind a curtain of cloth, a man with bright, intense eyes stirs a liquid in a bronze cup. That could be an alchemist. The origins of alchemy did not come from a single place. It was the result of many civilizations intersecting. In ancient Egypt, especially in the city of Alexandria, it was believed that alchemical knowledge was formed from a combination of metallurgy, fabric dyeing, glass making, and the religious belief in the transformation of the soul. They called it chemia, meaning the art of the Black Land, referring to the fertile soil of the Nile. In China, a different form of alchemy existed very early on, closely tied to Taoism. Practitioners sought to create elixirs for immortality, while also studying the transformation of elements, such as mercury and gold, to achieve eternal life. In India, alchemy was linked with yogic philosophy and Ayurveda medicine, focusing on purifying the body and mind while experimenting with alloys and minerals. Do you notice the common thread here? Whether in the East or the West, alchemy was always tied to the desire to surpass human limitations, a dream both practical and fantastical. But who were the first to record writings about alchemy? One prominent name from the early period is Hermes Trismegistus, a legendary figure blending the Egyptian god Thoth and the Greek god Hermes. He is believed to be the author of the Corpus Hermeticum, a foundational text for Western alchemical thought. Hermes is considered the forefather of alchemy, and his philosophy emphasized the connection between the cosmos, nature, and humanity, as above, so below. When you hear that phrase, do you feel a hint of mystery? As if, by understanding the laws of the heavens, you could also understand what happens deep within the earth, and vice versa. This is exactly why alchemists studied not only chemistry, but also astrology, religion, and even art. Let me ask you, if you lived in that time, would you choose to pursue turning iron into gold? Or try to create a potion that could let you live for several hundred more years? You might choose gold to precise, because it's practical. But for many alchemists, the ultimate goal was not just gold, but the philosopher's stone, a legendary substance said to transform base metals into gold while also granting eternal life. But, did they actually create it? The answer, at least according to recorded history, there is no evidence that anyone ever succeeded. But that didn't stop them from searching. Just as we today seek the perfect source of clean energy or a cure-all medicine, alchemy was the science not yet fulfilled of its time. What do you see first? A long table covered with glass vials, flasks, bronze cups, and sheets of paper filled with dense symbols. Some look like Greek letters, others resemble the sun, the moon, or interlocking circles. The sharp, pungent smell of sulphur mingles with the faint sweetness of herbs, creating a strange aroma that is both intriguing and slightly dreamlike. And in the middle of that room, a man in a dark robe wearing leather gloves is carefully pouring a liquid from one vessel into another. This is one of the core methods of alchemy, distillation. Why did they do it? Because they believed that every substance contained an essence, its purest and most potent part, and that repeated distillation could extract that essence. Sound familiar? That's right. Even today in chemistry or alcohol production, we still use the technique of distillation. But distillation was only one part. There were also calcination, placing a substance into fire and heating it at high temperatures until it turned into ash or powder. For the alchemist, this was the step of killing the impurities, leaving only the pure essence. You can imagine a block of glowing red metal in the furnace, slowly transforming into a layer of white-grey powder. Sublimation. Heating a substance so it changes directly from a solid into a gas, then condensing it back into a purer form. They often applied this to sulphur or mercury, believing these elements played a key role in creating the philosopher's stone. Fermentation. Not just for making wine. Alchemists believed fermentation was the step that breathed life into a substance, much like yeast making bread rise. Coagulation. When a solution became saturated, crystals would begin to form. For them, this was the sign of completion, the final stage of transformation. Isn't it fascinating to realise that many alchemical methods actually formed the foundation of modern science? Yes, the alchemists of old didn't just sit around daydreaming. They conducted numerous serious experiments, recorded their results, and even improved their instruments to achieve greater precision. But why did they have to use secret symbols instead of writing things plainly? Imagine living in the 14th century. Knowledge of how to transform matter, especially something that could create gold or an elixir of immortality, would be extremely dangerous if it fell into the hands of the wrong people or greedy rulers. That's why alchemists developed a symbolic language system. The sun symbol represented gold. The moon symbol represented silver. The inverted triangle could represent earth. The Mercury symbol stood for Mercury itself. Only those who had been initiated could understand these symbols. Just like today, if you haven't studied chemistry, formulas like H2O or NaCl would just look like meaningless signs. Interestingly, alchemical methods were not limited to matter. Alchemists also believed that the human spirit could be distilled, calcined, and crystallized to achieve perfection. For example, distilling the spirit equal removing negative thoughts and keeping only clear, enlightened wisdom. Calcining the soul equals going through difficult trials to burn away weakness. Crystallizing the self equals becoming a complete person in both morality and intellect. I want to ask you, if you were to apply the alchemist's way of thinking to your own life right now, what would you start distilling first? Your mind, your habits, or your dreams? While you're thinking, imagine this scene. A winter night in Europe, snow covering the world outside. But inside the alchemist's small room, the furnace glows red. Steam rises from a flask, winding its way through a coiled glass tube, then dripping, drop by drop, into a waiting vial. Candlelight flickers across the focused face of the man. With each drop that falls, he notes it carefully in his book, as if recording the heartbeat of a life being created. Do you feel as though you're there? If you do, then you've just experienced what thousands in the past once felt. An endless patience and the belief that one day a single perfect drop of liquid might hold the answer to everything. Have you ever wondered, who were the people who devoted their entire lives to searching for the Philosopher's Stone? Were they really old men with long white hair and tall pointed hats? Or were some of them completely different from what you imagine? If we walk through the doors of history, you will meet figures whose names still echo to this day, not only in the books of alchemy, but also in modern science. Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary beginning. We mentioned him earlier. No one is certain whether Hermes truly existed, or if he was simply a composite figure drawn from multiple sources. He was called Hermes the Thrice Great, for his wisdom, his power, and his ability to connect heaven and earth. He is regarded as the author of the Emerald Tablet, a short text containing the core philosophy of alchemy. Within it, the most famous line is, "As above, so below." It sounds simple, but for alchemists this was a reminder that every law in the universe is reflected in the material world. And vice versa. What do you think if a single sentence could make someone devote their entire life to understanding it? Zosimos of Panopolis, the first Egyptian alchemist to record in detail. Around the 3rd century AD in the city of Panopolis, Egypt, Zosimos left manuscripts that clearly describe distillation, calcination, and even mysterious symbols. Interestingly, in his works you will also encounter alchemical dreams. Zosimos believed that alchemical knowledge came not only from experiments, but also from spiritual experiences. In one famous dream, he saw himself being dismembered inside a vessel, then reborn as a new human being, symbolizing the complete transformation of both soul and matter. Have you ever dreamed of yourself changing into something else? If you have, then you can understand what Zosimos felt. Jabir ibn Hayyan, the father of experimental chemistry, moving to the medieval Islamic world around the 8th century, we meet Jabir ibn Hayyan, also known as Geber. He was not only an alchemist, but also one of the pioneers who laid the foundation for modern chemistry. He recorded hundreds of formulas, from distilling alcohol and producing acids to refining metals. Jabir believed that all metals were composed of 2 elements, mercury and sulfur, and that when combined in a perfect ratio, they would produce gold. Impressively, many of the techniques he developed are still used in laboratories today. You see, not all alchemists were mere dreamers. Some truly left behind a lasting scientific legacy. Albertus Magnus, philosopher and alchemist of Europe. In the 13th century, in Europe, Albertus Magnus was both a theologian and an alchemist. His studies ranged widely, from Aristotelian philosophy and medicine to metallurgy. There is a legend that he created a talking statue to guard his laboratory. Although this story has never been proven, it shows how imagination and reverence surrounded the alchemists of that era. Nicholas Flamel, the legend of eternal life. This is perhaps the most famous name to the general public, largely thanks to novels and films. Nicholas Flamel lived in Paris in the 14th century and was rumoured to have discovered the Philosopher's Stone and attained immortality. In reality, many records suggest he was simply a book copyist with some interest in alchemy. But the story of the immortal Flamel has become a part of Western culture, to the point that his name appears in hundreds of fictional works. What do you think? Could there truly be a man who lived for hundreds of years, all thanks to a single stone? Or is it all just a tale spun to satisfy curiosity? What's remarkable is that, regardless of their background, era or goals, all these alchemists shared one trait: perseverance. They never gave up. even when their results were often nothing but failure. And it was that very spirit, not just their experiments, that shaped the history of alchemy. Have you ever thought that something often considered mystical, like alchemy, could actually become the foundation for modern medicine? At first, it might sound unbelievable, but if we turn through the pages of history, you'll realise that much of the medical, chemical, and even philosophical knowledge we use today once sat on the work tables of alchemists. Alchemy and medicine. Imagine yourself in Europe in the 16th century, a small room with a faint scent of dried herbs in the air. On the table, alongside glass vessels and distillation tubes, are small cloth pouches filled with roots, dried leaves, and minerals of every colour. For many alchemists, transforming matter wasn't just about making gold. They believed that if they could understand the pure essence of minerals and plants, they could create medicines to cure illnesses. Paracelsus, a famous physician and alchemist of the 16th century, once said, "The dose makes the poison." This saying remains a basic principle in medicine and pharmacology today. He believed that the human body is a microcosm, reflecting the macrocosm of the outside world. Illness occurred when this balance was disrupted, and the role of medicine, much like alchemy, was to restore that balance. Do you think that if you lived in that time you would place your trust in a doctor who was also an alchemist? Or would you seek out a traditional healer? Alchemy and philosophy. Alchemy was not just about fire, glass vessels, or mysterious symbols. It was also a philosophical system. Alchemists believed that the material world and the spiritual world were deeply connected. Transforming a base metal into gold symbolized the journey of transforming the human soul itself, from darkness to enlightenment, from imperfection to perfection. This is why many alchemical texts are filled with metaphors and symbolic imagery. A dragon devouring its own tail, the sun and moon in harmony, the phoenix reborn from ashes. These were not just beautiful illustrations, but reminders of the cyclical law of transformation. Death and rebirth, loss and rediscovery. Do you realise that if you strip away the layer of mystery, alchemy can be seen as a philosophy of life? A philosophy that teaches patience, acceptance of challenges, and the pursuit of the best version of oneself. Alchemy and natural science. One thing often overlooked: alchemy was the direct predecessor of chemistry. Before there was a clear definition of elements, compounds, or chemical reactions, alchemists conducted thousands of experiments, heating metals, separating compounds, measuring reactions. They invented many tools still used in modern laboratories today, such as flasks, conduits, furnaces, and precision balances. These studies, though originally aimed at mystical goals, laid the foundation for later scientists to develop atomic theory, inorganic chemistry, and organic chemistry. Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scientists of all time, also spent many years studying alchemy. In his notes we find both formulas for concoctions, experiments with mercury, and even writings about the philosopher's stone. Perhaps you're thinking, even Newton believed in it. Yes, but for Newton and many others, alchemy was not just about making gold. It was a means to explore the hidden structure of the universe. Do you think that anything valuable enough for someone to devote their entire life to pursuing would also be valuable enough for others to exploit? Alchemy was no exception. Those who exploited the desire for gold. Throughout history, there has been no shortage of people claiming to be masters of alchemy in order to deceive the wealthy and powerful. They would carry flasks of liquid that changed colour when heated, or bars of metal cleverly plated with gold, then proclaim, "With just a bit more time and materials, I will turn your iron into pure gold." Can you guess the outcome? They would often vanish before the experiment was completed, leaving their patron with less money and a lump of metal. No different from before. In medieval Europe, such incidents happened so often that some kingdoms issued bans on practicing alchemy, not because they didn't believe in the possibility of transforming matter, but because too many imposters had exploited it for profit. dangerous failures. Even genuine alchemists could not avoid failure, and sometimes those failures were deadly. Imagine conducting an experiment with mercury in a sealed room without any concept of occupational safety. The toxic mercury vapours would slowly enter the body, causing tremors, confusion, and eventually death. There are records of alchemists suffering severe burns from exploding furnaces, or going blind when chemicals splashed into their eyes. Would you be willing to risk your life for a single drop of mysterious liquid? Ambition and politics. One thing rarely mentioned: alchemy was once a political tool. Some kings believed that if they possessed the philosopher's stone, they would have an endless supply of gold to fund wars and strengthen their rule. As a result, they ordered the capture of skilled alchemists, forcing them to work in the palace. But this pressure sometimes turned into tragedy. If they failed to produce results, the alchemist could be executed or imprisoned. I wonder, standing before the furnace in a royal palace, did an alchemist still dream of truth? Or only dream of surviving until tomorrow? Voices of opposition. There were also scholars and philosophers who openly criticised alchemy. They argued that it was nothing more than an elaborate deception, causing people to waste time and resources. In some periods, practicing alchemy was viewed as heresy or blasphemy, especially when it was tied to the idea that humans could create life, a power that religion claimed belonged solely to the divine. And yet, strangely enough, despite the frauds, the failures and the opposition, alchemy survived for centuries. Perhaps because deep down, it was not merely a story about gold or an elixir of life, but a story about the belief that the world still holds countless mysteries waiting to be discovered. Have you ever held a sheet of paper covered in strange symbols that you couldn't understand, yet felt as if they were hiding a great secret? In alchemy, that is exactly what every apprentice had to face. The language of the chosen. Ancient alchemists rarely wrote formulas or methods in plain words. Instead, they used a complex, symbolic language to represent elements, processes, or even spiritual concepts. For example, the sun, X gold, the moon, X silver, mercury, mercury, sulfur, salt. These were not just convenient shorthand, they were veils, and only those who had been initiated or endured trials could know their true meaning. Metaphorical symbols. Alchemy was not only about matter, but also about a spiritual journey. Many symbols were metaphors. The dragon devouring its own tail, Ouroboros, the eternal cycle of life and death, destruction and rebirth. The phoenix, rebirth from the ashes, a symbol of perfection after transformation. The king and queen, the union of opposing elements, like male and female metals merging to create gold. Do you see how these symbols are like encrypted fables? They were both lessons and maps for the practitioner. Mysterious drawings and diagrams. Many alchemical manuscripts also contained strange illustrations. A human with the head of a bird, a castle floating on clouds, a flask holding within it an entire miniature universe. These served both to conceal technical information and to spark the imagination. To an outsider, they might seem meaningless, but to an alchemist, every detail, colour, position, shape, carried its own message. The reason for secrecy. Why didn't they just write things plainly? There were three main reasons. To keep it from the greedy. If the formula to turn base metals into gold fell into the hands of the powerful, the consequences could be dire. To avoid trouble with religion and authorities, many regimes were suspicious of alchemy, viewing it as heresy. To preserve the value of knowledge. Knowledge is more precious when it must be earned through challenges. I wonder, Thamar, if you lived in that time, would you have the patience to decipher hundreds of symbols just to learn how to heat a metal? The lasting influence of the symbolic system. Interestingly, even though the age of alchemy has passed, its language and symbols still survive in many areas. From modern logos and artwork to video games and films, they carry with them a hint of mystery. an invitation for those who love to uncover what lies hidden beneath the surface of an image. If you spent half your life chasing a dream but never reached it, what would you do? Keep searching or take a different path? For some alchemists, the answer was turn toward pure science. Robert Boyle, the man who laid the foundations of modern chemistry, 17th century. In a laboratory in London, Robert Boyle was carefully measuring gas pressure with a long, curved glass instrument. He had once been interested in alchemy, reading ancient texts filled with mysterious symbols. But eventually, Boyle realised that instead of trying to find the philosopher's stone, he wanted to understand the laws of nature in a clear, verifiable way. From then on, he became one of the founders of the scientific method. Observation, experimentation, recording, and repetition. Boyle's The Skeptical Chemist is considered a milestone marking the end of the alchemical era in Europe and the beginning of modern chemistry. You see, sometimes giving up an old dream can open a new path for all of humanity. Antoine Lavoisier, the man who named the elements. In the 18th century in France, Antoine Lavoisier was not only a scientist, but also a reformer. At the time, many still believed in the phlogiston theory, a vague idea rooted in alchemy. But Lavoisier used experiments to prove that combustion required oxygen, and he began naming and classifying elements in a scientific way. Thanks to his work, the concepts of element and compound were clearly defined, completely replacing alchemy's hazy notions. If Boyle had opened the door, then Lavoisier was the one who built the solid framework for the edifice of chemistry. Dmitri Mendeleev, the periodic table, instead of symbol charts. In the 19th century, in Russia, Dmitri Mendeleev arranged the elements by atomic weight, creating the periodic table. Strangely enough, he left gaps for elements that had not yet been discovered, predicting their properties. And most of his predictions turned out to be correct. If the alchemists had once dreamed of a map leading to the philosopher's stone, then Mendeleev's periodic table was the real map leading to an understanding of the structure of matter, the transformation of thought. What these people had in common was this: they did not completely reject alchemy. They acknowledged that alchemy had been the starting point. But to go further, it was necessary to leave behind the mystical fog and step into the light of the scientific method. Do you think that without thousands of years of alchemy as a foundation, modern science could have developed so quickly? Perhaps not. Alchemy tried and failed many times, but each failure was a paving stone on the road to science. Do you think that when an idea is disproven by science, it will completely disappear? In reality, it often doesn't die. It simply moves to a new home. For alchemy, its new home has been in art, literature, and the human imagination. In Renaissance painting, step into an art gallery in 15th, 16th century Europe, and you'll see paintings depicting alchemists in their laboratories, surrounded by glass vessels, flasks, and furnaces. But sometimes these images weren't just meant to record an occupation. They were metaphors for the quest for knowledge. A painting by Peter Bruegel, for example, shows a poor alchemist intently mixing liquids while his wife and children wait nearby. The hidden meaning is satirical, implying that those who pursue alchemy might neglect the practical aspects of life. Do you see how, even when criticised, alchemy still served as artistic inspiration? In classical literature, from Shakespeare to Goethe, alchemy has been woven into storytelling. In Goethe's Faust, the main character makes a pact with the devil in exchange for knowledge and power. A story strongly influenced by the image of alchemists, those willing to give up everything to achieve their goals. Even in Paulo Coelho's novel The Alchemist, alchemy is not just a technique, but a journey of pursuing one's dreams and discovering oneself. You see, in every era, it has remained a symbolic language of transformation. In modern popular culture today, alchemy appears in films, comics, and video games. You might encounter it in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, with Nicholas Flamel and the legendary stone, Full Metal Alchemist, the Japanese manga and anime where alchemy is built into a magic system with strict rules, role-playing games, where players mix potions, transmute materials, and search for the philosopher's stone to upgrade their characters. What's fascinating is that even though most audiences know alchemy isn't real, they're still drawn to the thrill of uncovering hidden secrets. Alchemy as an eternal metaphor. Perhaps the reason alchemy endures in culture is because it doesn't just talk about metals or gold. It speaks about the journey of transforming oneself. All of us have wanted to transform, to become better, stronger, wiser. Alchemy becomes a story in which anyone, in any era, can see a reflection of themselves. Have you ever wondered why something that science disproved hundreds of years ago, like alchemy, can still spark curiosity, even fascination? 1. Because it's a story about dreams. Alchemy, though unsuccessful scientifically, succeeded in nurturing the imagination. It promised the things humanity has always longed for: endless gold, prolonged life, absolute knowledge. We know these things aren't real, but dreams don't have to be real. They only need to be beautiful and moving enough for us to want to follow them. 2. Because it's about transformation. Everyone has something they want to change: themselves, their circumstances, or the world around them. Alchemy becomes a perfect metaphor, turning the lead of life into the gold of dreams. Even if you don't believe in furnaces or the philosopher's stone, you can still believe in the idea that patience and effort can transform anything. 3. Because it keeps a touch of mystery. In an age where almost any question can be answered with a few clicks, alchemy still holds gaps no one has fully filled: ancient texts that remain undeciphered, strange symbols without definitive explanations, stories of mysterious figures whose existence is uncertain. It's these gaps that keep our curiosity alive. 4. Because it connects science and art. Few fields stand at the crossroads of science while also delving into art, philosophy, and spirituality as alchemy does. It shows us that knowledge isn't always neatly divided into true or false. Sometimes it is a beautiful journey of discovery, regardless of the final outcome. Imagine this: you're in a quiet evening, sitting at an old wooden table. In front of you is a thick alchemy book, with candlelight casting a golden glow on each page. You know the formulas inside won't create real gold, but you still want to read. Because you're searching not just for material things, but for something deeper. A story, an inspiration, a different way of seeing the world. And perhaps that is exactly why alchemy has never disappeared. It has left behind its role as a science to become a living symbol of aspiration, of transformation, and of humanity's endless journey to seek something better. Have you ever wanted to stand right beside an alchemist, to witness with your own eyes the moment they believed they were about to uncover the secret of the universe? If so, then imagine yourself opening a heavy wooden door leading into a 16th century laboratory. The air is thick with the scent of hot metal and dried herbs. The fire in the furnace crackles softly. A red golden light spills across clear glass vessels, each holding a bubbling liquid. The experiment to turn lead into gold. This is perhaps the most classic dream of alchemy. One of the most famous recorded experiments was by the German alchemist Hennig Brand in 1669. He believed that urine contained the essence of life that could lead to gold. So, Brand collected dozens of buckets of urine, allowed them to decay, then boiled, filtered, and distilled them. The result? He did not find gold, but he did discover phosphorus, a new element that glows in the dark. You see, even though he failed in his original goal, Brand accidentally made a genuine scientific discovery: the experiment to create the elixir of immortality. In ancient China, many Taoist alchemists sought to create an immortality pill from rare minerals. One common formula was a mixture containing mercury and sulfur. The result? No one became immortal, but many emperors and officials died from heavy metal poisoning. This story shows the tragic side of alchemy. The desire for longevity sometimes shortened life instead. The experiment to create the philosopher's stone. In medieval Europe, there are many records of alchemists claiming to have created the philosopher's stone. One famous story tells of George Ripley, a 15th century English monk. He was said to have produced a glowing red substance capable of turning base metals into gold. According to legend, Ripley sent this gold to fund the Crusades. However, no physical evidence of his stone has ever been found. Was this a lost truth, or merely a legend woven to enhance his reputation? The answer remains unknown. Isaac Newton's experiments. Few people know that Newton, the great physicist and mathematician, spent much time studying alchemy. Among the thousands of pages of his notes are numerous formulas and descriptions of experiments with mercury, gold, and alloys. Notably, Newton never published this research, perhaps because he feared it would spark controversy or be misused. Do you think that if Newton had revealed it all, the history of science might have taken a different turn? Looking at these experiments, we see one thing clearly. Alchemy was both an unfinished scientific journey and a story of ambition and belief. Some experiments brought new discoveries, others left nothing but white smoke and disappointment, but all are deeply etched into the memory of history. Have you ever heard a story that you weren't sure was real, yet found yourself so captivated that you wanted to believe it? The history of alchemy is full of such tales. The legend of Basil Valentine. Basil Valentine is said to have been an alchemist and monk living in Germany in the 15th century. However, many scholars suspect he was a fictional figure, created from anonymous manuscripts. In the writings attributed to Basil, there is a description of the elixir of life, a potion made from pure gold dissolved in a special solution. According to the accounts, anyone who drank it would be healthy and live a long life. No one ever found the exact formula, but the stories of this elixir led many to spend their entire lives searching, believing that with just one more clue, the secret would be revealed. The mysterious journey of Nicholas Flamel. Nicholas Flamel, a figure featured in many novels and films, was in reality a book copyist in 14th century Paris. After his death, rumours began to spread that Flamel had once found an ancient book containing the secret to creating the Philosopher's Stone, and that he and his wife had travelled across Europe to decode it. It was said that afterward, he became unusually wealthy and lived longer than the average lifespan of his time. Perhaps it was simply shrewdness in the book trade. But legends have a way of choosing the more dramatic version of events. The man who vanished from the furnace room. A lesser-known story tells of an unnamed alchemist in 16th century Prague. While testing a new reaction with a mixture of mercury and sulphur, he locked himself inside his laboratory and instructed that no one disturb him. 3 days later, when the door was forced open, the room contained only a cold furnace, and no trace of him. Some say he was killed by toxic fumes and his body destroyed by the heat. Others believe he had transcended the material world and stepped into another dimension, becoming part of alchemical legend. The mysterious traveller of the 18th century. In a small German town, records tell of a traveller dressed like a nobleman who claimed to be an alchemist and stayed at an inn for several months. He often bought cheap metals, then paid his rent with pure gold. When the innkeeper asked about it, he only smiled and said, "It is the gift of knowledge." One morning he vanished, leaving behind an empty room and a few sheets of paper covered in strange symbols. These papers are still kept in the local museum, but no one has fully deciphered them. Whether true or invented, these stories continue to be told because they keep alchemy in that hazy realm, a place where anything magical could happen. And sometimes, it's that very haze that makes people remember it forever. Unexpected scientific discoveries, like the story of Hennig Brand, who searched for gold but discovered phosphorus, or the Chinese alchemists who sought an elixir of immortality, but instead contributed to metallurgy and the invention of gunpowder. Even though the original goals were often not achieved, these accidental discoveries paved the way for new branches of science. It can be said that alchemy left humanity a treasure trove of experimental methods, extraction techniques, and laboratory tools that modern chemistry still uses today. Lessons in patience and curiosity. Alchemists, whether mocked or doubted, devoted decades to a single experiment. repeating it over and over with the belief that just one more attempt might reveal the secret. I wonder, without that almost stubborn patience, would humanity today be willing to spend decades pursuing modern scientific projects like space exploration or complex medical research, lasting influence on culture? Even after science distanced itself from alchemy, its stories, symbols, and imagery lived on. In painting, literature, and film, alchemy continues to serve as a metaphor for transformation and discovery. It is not merely the memory of an old science, but an endless source of artistic inspiration. The gateway to modern chemistry. If modern science is a grand building, then alchemy is its foundation. Imperfect, but still essential. It provided the first bricks, the idea that matter can be transformed, that phenomena can be observed and repeated, and that the world holds hidden laws which humans can uncover. Have you ever thought that the same dream could be nurtured by many different peoples, yet each choosing their own path to reach it? Alchemy is the clearest proof of that. Ancient Egypt, the art of the Black Land. We begin in Alexandria, the legendary city of Egypt, where Greek, Egyptian, and Eastern knowledge converged. The Egyptians called alchemy chemia, from chem, meaning black earth, referring to the fertile soil along the Nile. For them, transforming matter was not just a metallurgical technique, but also a religious ritual. Priests believed that metals had souls, and refining them was a spiritual journey, much like the human soul's path from imperfection to purity. You can imagine the smelting furnaces along the riverbank, the firelight casting shadows on walls, engraved with images of Thoth, the god of wisdom, watching over each step of the experiment. Ancient China, the way of elixirs, and the quest for immortality. In the distant East, Chinese alchemy developed alongside Taoism, known as Liandan Shu, the art of refining elixirs. Their main goal was to create the elixir of immortality, a potion that could grant eternal life or spiritual enlightenment. Chinese alchemists used many rare minerals and precious metals such as gold, mercury, and cinnabar. They believed gold, being incorruptible, symbolized immortality, while cinnabar could be transformed into gold under special conditions. However, as we now know, many of these elixirs contain deadly toxins, leading to the mysterious deaths of numerous emperors. Picture an Eastern palace filled with the scent of incense, bright red pills resting in jade boxes, and beside them, an alchemist convinced that he has just touched the secret of immortality. India, Rasayana, and the purification of the body. In ancient India, alchemy, or Rasayana, was closely tied to Ayurveda medicine. Its goal was not only to extend life, but also to improve health, intellect, and spiritual strength. Indian alchemists emphasized purification, not only refining metals to create precious alloys, but also cleansing the body through diet, medicinal herbs, and yoga practice. They believed that the human body was a furnace, and that every transformation in the outer world reflected a transformation within. The Islamic world, alchemy as the foundation of chemistry. During the Islamic Golden Age, 8th to 14th centuries, alchemy was elevated to the level of a serious scholarly discipline. Here we meet Jabir ibn Hayyan, Geber, who systematized alchemical knowledge into a method resembling science. He believed that all metals were composed of two philosophical elements: mercury, symbolizing malleability, and sulfur, symbolizing solidity. Islamic scholars translated and preserved many Greek alchemical texts, while also inventing new techniques for distillation, filtration, and crystallization, methods that later spread to Europe and became the foundation of chemistry. Imagine the great markets of Baghdad at the time, where spices were sold openly, while tucked away in small shops, alchemists quietly worked, recording notes on parchment scrolls. Looking back, we see the same desire for transformation, but each civilization blended it with its own beliefs, religion, and philosophy. And it is precisely this diversity that has made alchemy not just the story of one land, but the shared story of humanity. The Silk Road was not only a trade route for silk and spices, it was also a corridor for the transportation of knowledge. From China, formulas for elixirs and metallurgical techniques travelled westward through Central Asia into Persia. From India, methods of purifying metals and medicinal substances according to Ayurveda spread into the Islamic world. From Egypt and Greece, alchemical manuscripts were copied, translated into Arabic, and later returned to medieval Europe. You can imagine a caravan pausing at an oasis, gathered around a campfire, where merchants exchanged not only textiles, but also secret formulas written on parchment, accompanied by a warning. Read carefully, but don't let others see. Alexandria, where the sea meets the desert. Alexandria, Egypt, was once the greatest centre of knowledge in the ancient world. In the Library of Alexandria, manuscripts from Greece, Egypt, India, and Babylon were stored, translated and compared. Many scholars there combined Egyptian alchemical theory with Greek philosophy and Babylonian astrology, creating a unique hybrid tradition. Although much of the library was destroyed by fire, the fragments of knowledge that survived were enough to sow the seeds of alchemy across the Mediterranean. Baghdad, the bridge of the Islamic Golden Age. When the Abbasid dynasty came to power, Baghdad became a vast translation factory. At the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, Greek and Egyptian manuscripts were translated into Arabic. Alchemists such as Jabir ibn Hayyan did more than copy. They experimented, added, and turned theory into practice. Later, when this knowledge returned to Europe through Islamic Spain and the Crusades, it completely reshaped the foundations of Western science. Medieval Europe, where all currents converged. When Arabic knowledge met the old Greco-Roman tradition, along with the influence of Christian philosophy, Europe developed a new form of alchemy, both the study of matter and a spiritual journey. Scholars such as Albertus Magnus and Roger Bacon were deeply influenced by both Arabic manuscripts and new experimental methods. Diversity as a source of vitality. What's fascinating is that the more it was exchanged, the more diverse and visually rich alchemy became. An Eastern dragon symbol could appear in a European book, accompanied by a Latin caption. An Indian metallurgical recipe could be recorded in an Arabic manuscript and eventually find its way into a laboratory in Paris. You see, alchemy was not the product of a single civilization, but a symphony of many, each adding its own rhythm and tone, making the story richer than anyone could have imagined. Have you ever noticed that each civilization is like an artisan, carving its own pattern onto the great stone of alchemy? Only when all the pieces are fitted together do we see the complete picture, and it is far more beautiful than any single fragment on its own. Egypt, symbols and rituals. Ancient Egypt gave alchemy the language of symbols. Images of the god Thoth, the ibis bird, and the Eye of Horus still appear in European alchemical manuscripts thousands of years later. They also pass down the belief that the transformation of matter must go hand in hand with the transformation of the spirit, an idea that endured stubbornly in Western alchemical philosophy. China, the concept of unity between man and the universe. Chinese alchemy brought forth the idea that the human body is a small furnace, mirroring the great furnace of nature. This principle of Tian Ren Heiyi, harmony between heaven and man, influenced not only alchemy, but also left deep marks on traditional medicine, health cultivation practices, and even martial arts. Although many elixir formulas were unsafe, their way of observing the interactions between humans and the environment inspired later biological studies. India, the concept of complete purification, Indian alchemy, left a unique legacy, a blend of early chemistry and holistic healthcare. Rasayana sought not only to transform metals, but also to purify the body, mind, and spirit. Today, many Ayurvedic practices still preserve this essence, even though they have moved away from alchemical elements. The Islamic world, the scientific method. Applied to alchemy, Islamic scholars transformed alchemy from an esoteric art into a field with systematic experimentation, record-keeping, and verification. They developed techniques for distillation, filtration, crystallization, methods still used in modern laboratories. Through their work, many Greek and Egyptian texts were preserved and passed to Europe, sparking the Renaissance. Europe, alchemy as a philosophical story. When Europe received the knowledge of other civilizations, it did not just practice alchemy, but turned it into a metaphor for the spiritual journey. The image of turning lead into gold became not only an experiment, but also an invitation for people to transform themselves from the ordinary to the noble. It was this symbolic layer that allowed alchemy to live on in arts and culture, even as science took a different path. A shared legacy. From a bird's eye view, alchemy is like a great river, born from many small tributaries scattered across the world. Each branch carried its own silt, symbols, techniques, philosophies, and even mystical tales. When they merged into one flow, they carried with them everything humanity had ever dreamed of, experimented with, failed at, and hoped for. Imagine you are standing on a bridge, looking down at that river. The water carries away both the golden light of sunset and the darkness of the coming night. You know the river will empty into the sea, and that sea is modern science. But in your heart, you still feel a lingering affection for the beauty of the journey it has taken. Have you ever thought that there was a moment in history when science and mysticism were not in opposition, but coexisted like two sides of the same coin? The Renaissance was precisely that moment, an awakening. Europe. Centuries. After the religion-dominated centuries of the Middle Ages, Europe entered the Renaissance, a period of revived classical knowledge, a thirst for discovery, and a celebration of humanity. Greek, Roman, and Arabic manuscripts were translated, copied, and widely circulated. In cities like Florence, Venice, and Prague, alchemists, painters, architects, and philosophers could sit together in a cafe and discuss how to turn lead into gold, or how the structure of the human body reflected the order of the universe. Laboratories as art studios alchemy at this time was not just glass vessels and furnaces. It was also meticulous drawings and complex diagrams with high aesthetic value. An alchemical book might contain distillation formulas alongside illustrations so detailed they resembled works of art. Many alchemists were also painters or architects, for they believed that both the transformation of matter and the creation of art followed the harmonious principles of nature. Notable figures: Paracelsus, 1400. Swiss physician and alchemist, famous for his belief that medicine should be based on chemicals and minerals rather than relying solely on traditional herbs. He saw alchemy as a tool for healing, not just for making gold. John Dee, 1527 to 1608, advisor to Queen Elizabeth V, as well as an alchemist, mathematician, and astrologer. Dee believed alchemy could open a gateway to communication with the metaphysical world, and he spent years studying the language of angels. Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler. Primarily astronomers, but both encountered alchemical theories and were influenced by the idea that the universe and matter operated under mysterious yet unified principles. The blending of reason and mysticism. In this era, an alchemist could also be a scientist. They saw no contradiction between studying chemical reactions and searching for the philosopher's stone, because both pursuits were part of the same goal: understanding the hidden order of the universe. Perhaps this is why Renaissance alchemy is so alluring. It was not bound entirely by reality, yet it did not drift entirely into the vague and fantastical. The atmosphere of the time. Imagine walking down a narrow street in 16th century Prague. On your right, a silversmith's workshop. On your left, a bookstore selling hand-copied alchemical manuscripts. The sound of hammering, the turning of pages, the murmur of conversation mingles with the clink of liquid being poured into glass flasks. Everything seems to breathe in the same rhythm, the rhythm of curiosity and discovery. Have you ever imagined that there were once cities considered the capitals of secrets? Places where alchemists from across Europe gathered, not only to work but also to exchange the pieces of a puzzle they believed would change the world. Prague, the alchemical capital of the Holy Roman Empire. In the late 16th century, under Emperor Rudolf II, Prague became the greatest alchemical centre in Europe. Rudolf was a passionate patron, gathering alchemists, astronomers, and artists into his court. In Hradčany Castle, secret laboratories were built, where experiments to turn metals into gold were carried out day and night. Figures like Edward Kelly and John Dee once worked here, leaving behind countless mysterious tales of the philosopher's stone and seances to speak with angels. Florence, where art meets alchemy. Renaissance. Florence was not only a hub of painting and architecture, but also a place where alchemy merged with craftsmanship. The workshops of the Medici, the city's most powerful family, produced not only jewellery, but also researched colours, alloys, and dyeing techniques. Many alchemists here were interested in creating pigments that were both durable and vibrant for frescoes and paintings, seeing this too as a form of transforming matter into eternal beauty. London Alchemy, between commerce and the court. In England, London was a place where alchemy was practiced in both academic circles and among merchants. Some alchemists sought royal patronage, promising in return to bring gold to the national treasury. Figures like Simon Forman and Elias Ashmole preserved numerous manuscripts blending alchemical formulas with astrology and traditional medicine. At the city's docks, whispered tales persisted about secret shipments carrying the philosopher's stone from the continent, Paris, from secrecy to public knowledge. In Renaissance and early modern Paris, alchemy began to move from the shadows into the light of academia. Some universities offered early chemistry courses, still heavily influenced by alchemy. The manuscripts of Nicolas Flamel were copied and discussed, though their authenticity was always debated. What these centres had in common, whether in Prague, Florence, London or Paris, Renaissance alchemy always lived on the boundary between science, experimentation, measurement and technical innovation, art, the use of colours, imagery and symbolism to convey ideas, mysticism, belief in the existence of the philosopher's stone and secrets beyond human comprehension. You can imagine these cities as places where the glow of the furnace mingled with the footsteps of dreamers, leaving us a legacy that is both real and imagined. Have you ever witnessed a dream that lasted so long that when it finally had to end, people still felt reluctant to let it go? Alchemy's entry into the modern era was exactly like that. Science changes the rules. In the 17th to 18th centuries, Europe saw the rise of the scientific method. Every hypothesis had to be tested, repeated, and proven. The vague concepts of alchemy, essence, the soul of metals, began to be replaced by clearer ideas. Elements, compounds, chemical reactions. Laboratories gradually abandoned mystical symbols, replacing them with equations and formulas. New discoveries cut off the old dream. Antoine Lavoisier, with his experiments on oxygen and combustion, dismantled the phlogiston theory that many alchemists once believed. The creation of the periodic table in the 19th century made it clear that one element could not be transformed into another through ordinary chemical methods. A heavy blow to the core of alchemy. The dream of turning lead into gold still lived on, but it now belonged to the field of nuclear physics, no longer to the alchemist's laboratory. Retreat into the shadows. As science advanced, alchemy gradually withdrew to the margins, becoming more of a mystical pursuit than an experimental one. Some people continued their studies, but they often tied them to astrology, mysticism, and personal philosophy, rather than seeking measurable results. Universities no longer taught alchemy, and governments paid little attention to it, except when con artists exploited its name for profit. A faint light remaining. Even though it was no longer part of mainstream science, alchemy left its mark. In art, it lived on as a symbol of transformation. In philosophy, it became a metaphor for the journey of self-perfection. In science, it stood as a reminder that all progress today stands on the shoulders of those who came before, even those who walked the wrong path. Imagine you are standing in an abandoned laboratory. On the table lies a cracked glass flask, a few yellowed pages, and a faintly carved sun symbol on the wood. Outside, the world has entered a new era, but here, the warmth of an old dream still lingers. And that is the history of alchemy. Surely by now you've had a good night's sleep, haven't you? Come back tomorrow and tell me in the comments when this story helped you drift off. Thank you for listening.